Well, it's happened again. After weeks of being completely absent from your project, your COO has just sent a scathing email to you and the team about how disappointed they are about the project's progress and the way that things are being done. Now everyone's scrambling to meet new expectations that they previously didn't know that they had agreed to. It's emotional, it's frustrating, and actually, it's stalling the project. Is this just the way of things, or is there a way to get operations and project management in lockstep? If you've struggled to build clarity and trust between project managers and operations teams, keep listening. We're going to be unpacking exactly how to find that perfect interlock between ops team members and project managers so that everybody is singing from the same songbook and are working in cahoots to grow the business in a way that everyone on the team can benefit from. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. My name is Galen Low with the Digital Project Manager. We are a community of digital professionals on a mission to help each other get skilled, get confident, and get connected so that we can elevate the value of project management in a digital world. If you want to hear more about that, head over to thedigitalprojectmanager.com. Alright, so today we're talking about finding that perfect interlock between ops and PMO and what impact that can have on a business's team culture as well as its bottom line. With me today is the one and only Alyson Caffrey, owner and operator of Operations Agency based out of Nashville, Tennessee. Hello, Alyson.
Hey, Galen. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. Great to see you, as always.
Yeah, likewise.
And first of all, congrats on being named as one of the top agency coaches of 2022 by our good friends over there at Parakeeto. That's so exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was a little bit surprised, but ultimately just extremely flattered, right?
I mean, listen, everything I know about you, everything I've heard about you, your reputation precedes you. So I was not surprised to see you on that list.
Thank you very much.
There it mentions your business, Operations Agency. And I'm wondering, could you tell us a little bit about Operations Agency and just the types of organizations that your team helps?
Yeah, so Operations Agency is named exactly for what it is. It is an operations agency, and I know a lot of people think operations is everything, and it's getting things together behind the scenes, and surely it is all that stuff. But what we do at Operations Agency is we take a look at businesses and really partner with the owners to create an operational blueprint that serves them, helps their clients get better results, and helps their team perform more effectively. And so typically how that looks is we usually jump in with service providers. That's probably our number one, because I find that service providers struggle the most with the I'm a freelancer to I'm a business owner transition. And it's challenging to kind of maintain quality and maintain profit margins and grow the business at the same time if, the owner is kind of in the weeds of fulfillment and all of that stuff. So we really help bridge that gap.
That's super cool. And yes, I can absolutely relate from my sort of work history. Worked with a lot of agencies that are owner operators, right? They came up just as entrepreneurs, solo with a small team, and then still delivering the work, and then having to then figure out that notion of, okay, business operations, that's something I need to learn. It's not the thing that I started my business with. It's the thing that I need to learn now to grow it.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think it ends up being something that they fall into that seems unnatural to them. So I always say Operations Agency was born out of need. People just started coming to me and being like, can you please just help me do this? Because it's not my language. And, I respect that. I really do. I respect when someone knows, okay, this is a weakness of mine. And, it's just something that I need to work through as an owner in order for my business to thrive.
I mean, it's in this day and age, it's actually kind of silly to try and be all things to all people. There are areas where we can just, learn lessons from the folks who've done it before, who know it, and then spread our wings from there. I think that's super cool.
Surely.
Tell me a little bit about what led to Operations Agency. I know you as this badass entrepreneur, this business consultant, the wolf, right? But I wondered if you could give folks just a quick intro of just who you are at work and just in personal life, and also kind of what led you towards creating Operations Agency in the first place.
Yeah. So I actually got my start. I got hired out of college as an executive assistant into a brand new business, right? It was an owner operator business, and it was a lot of moving parts, and there were really only 4 core people on the team. And we grew that business pretty significantly in the 2 years that I was there. And I ended up going from executive assistant to the CEO to the operations manager of about 10 to 15 employees, right? We had a full sales team, we had a full marketing team. it grew rather quickly. And so when, natural transition time in my life, we were moving actually at the time, and I parted ways with that company. And within a few weeks, a couple of people who I had, just met through that business had come to me and said, hey, can you do for me what you did for that guy? And I was like,
Hmm.
well, I guess I could. I kind of formed operations agency out of a need. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate. I was like up at 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember thinking I have to create a proposal for my very first client. And I wanted them to think I was very legitimate. So I was buying my domain name and creating this like super fancy proposal and better proposals. And I was just like, I really want them to think I'm legit, because he was legit, right? He was like, I
Hmm.
need help growing my ops. And I really wanted to make sure that I seemed like the good fit there. So
Hmm.
it was pretty fun, I think, in the beginning, especially just kind of bootstrapping it together. And I did a lot of the same things that agencies that we work with do, right? I was
Hmm.
the person who was marketing, I was the person who was selling, I was the person who was fulfilling, I was doing all the invoices and processing the payroll and all that stuff. And I think it is important to go through a lot of that stuff because you get a deep understanding of, okay,
Hmm.
this is what it takes to run a
Hmm.
business. And so I definitely always encourage my new clients. I'm like, don't get upset that you're in this position. I know you feel overworked and I know things are crazy and you're like pulling your hair out in the shower, but you went through this because you really care about helping the people that you help, and you really care about making a difference with your business. And so that was something that I had to kind of learn through that process was, okay, do I really want this? Do I really want the business? Because there were multiple times where people were like, can you just be my full-time ops manager? Can you just like, can I just
Hmm.
hire you? And I was like, respectfully, no, but I'm open to offers. Like respectfully, no. Um, but yeah, it was just super fun. But I think it was funny. My personal life wise, I mean, it's just wonderful. I have never in my life thought to myself that I could be working from home full time and kind of how do I put it? Financially free to the point where like we can create whatever we want to create, right? We can
Hmm.
say, okay, this is what I want my business to be, and I just have a clear path to grow that. When my husband and I chat about like our goals and our dreams and things, it's always so fun because we use the business as a vehicle, right? We say, okay, we
Hmm.
get to help these people and we get to do these fun things with these projects, and it also helps us become, who we want to become, right? It helps us, be able to like afford the things we want to afford and take the trips and have the experiences that we want to have.
Hmm.
And so it's really fun when you kind of think about your business as like another relationship in your life, which I totally do. So yeah, that's like behind the scenes ops agency, how it is in Allie's life.
That's super cool. I didn't know it was like the thing that went through in my head. I was like, oh, and just like that, operations agency. I was
Yeah,
expecting a
just
little
like
bit more
that.
of like the run up. But one thing that I think is really inspiring, especially if any of our listeners are in an entrepreneurial stage in their career. I mean, people who have 2 decades of experience in other businesses might not have that perspective of doing all the things, tearing your hair out in the shower, right? And pouring just blood, sweat, and tears into something to make it work
Yeah.
really, really well. So I thought maybe let's give our listeners their bearings. What we want to talk about today is just the relationship between a project management team and an operations team, and how that relationship has an impact on just the way a business grows, the way it scales, but also, the culture of that business and the way folks work together. But let's back it up. What exactly do we mean when we say project management versus operations, and what is the relationship between the two?
Yeah, so I'll start with the easier one. Operations is basically, in my mind, a two kind of track highway, right? If we think about a business, if it operates healthily, it usually operates in two really key ways. The first is your standard, right? So it is how we deliver on core services, how we keep our marketing engine up and running, how we keep our sales engine up and running, right? The main things that are going to be the day in and day out, they're not changing. There are policies, our procedures, our standards, right? And so that is what keeps the business at the same level or growing at a small percentage rate year
Hmm.
over year. That's like the safety net, if you will. That's number one. Then the second is the growth initiatives. And so
Hmm.
that is our quarterly. I usually like to think of it as your quarterly planning initiatives. How do we plan to grow a certain product or service? Are we planning on launching a book? Are we doing a live event? Are we doing something that we don't typically do inside of our standards to either improve upon standards. It's an initiative to either improve upon standards or create something potentially new in the business, right? Whether it's a new revenue arm, if we're hiring a brand new CMO, if we're doing, whatever it is that we're doing there, something that didn't exist already. So that is operations in my mind. It's usually in two kind of buckets, and usually it comes in standards and then it comes in your initiatives. Now, project management lives under both of those hoods, in my opinion. And so that's why project management, I think, can get a little bit, I think that these things can get intertwined often. And I think that they should be intertwined. But unfortunately, everything in a small business, and everyone always comes to me and they're like, oh, my team wears so many hats and I wear so many hats. And I'm like, congrats, you're in a small business, until you're up in the crazy numbers, right? Until you're in a position where you've actually got, a really huge organization. And it's really important to keep people in their lanes. In this case, right? If we start to think about the small business and the fluidity, we can think about projects as any finite initiative, whether it's repeated or whether it's unrepeated, right? Whether it's an initiative or not. For example, like if you're a project-based service company and you take on a new client, even if it is a project, but it operates in the standard operating procedures category, right? You've got a project manager who has a set level of SOPs and a set amount of time or a set team that they're going through this kind of rinse and repeat process with. If you have a project manager on the initiative side, that person might be in a position where they need to fill in the gaps a little bit more, right? So I think that PMOs in kind of both of those areas might need to even have different competencies, but that's kind of an aside. But nonetheless, so that's kind of, I think, the difference between, project management and operations. And it's important to note that project management is nested kind of underneath operations, right? So if we think of operations as kind of the hood of everything that you do, project management exists in underneath ops, but in everything. You've got marketing projects, you've got sales projects, you've got fulfillment projects, you've got, anything, right? HR projects if you're hiring a new person. And so in my mind, it's anything with, again, a finite initiative base, right? We have a start date and an end date, and this is when it's going to get done.
Some stuff is just the humdrum day to day, and some stuff is like the bigger leap forward in terms of, an initiative to grow the business. I think we can anchor around that, because as a project manager, sometimes I do feel separate from ops, even though I know I'm within it. It's like, okay, the way I'm measured, the way I do my job, the reason why my role exists is to go and execute this plan. But sometimes I'm actually I lose sight. And I think project managers can be guilty of losing sight of what that project does for operations. So I thought I might just ask you, what do you feel is the most important way that a project management team supports operations?
Yeah, I think the best way is just to meet standards, in my opinion, right? Creating a standard that says, if this is, let's just say, a service initiative, right? If I am a digital marketing agency and I have an SEO project that I'm fulfilling on, the project manager's job is to meet the standards of that deliverable, right? Which in essence affects so many different things operationally. The client will stay for longer, which increases our revenue, right? The client will maybe refer us business if they're in a position where they've had a really great experience. We can grow potentially month over month, monthly recurring revenue of the business. So that is directly operationally, and financially included. And so I think that if we can position in front of PMOs, the standards of fulfilling on a project like this and what it actually does mean for the business. I always take a look at delta of time that we go over on projects. That's a huge number for me that I always look at. And in my mind, I can say if we can get our delta under 1 day, which is 0 days, it's a fancy way of saying 0 days, then we can be in a position where the company can grow. We can obviously take on more clients. We have better trainable ways to fulfill on some of these projects. And so I like to encourage that type of rhetoric around standards and around things like that. I think it's easy to lose sight. And I think that is it specifically with its standard operating procedures, right? Because I think the initiative side of things, if a PMO is, launching, let's just say a new product, right? We know what this means for the business. We know it's a big new thing and everybody's excited and there's going to be errors and omissions and changes and all the things, right? But then the person just needs to kind of stay on top of things. And so I find that it's easy to lose sight in standards. And I think that with initiatives, as long as we have a kind of project management rules of engagement understanding, meaning that we know that we're updating a project at a specific frequency. We're meeting about a project at a specific frequency. They have access to a specific team with these specific skill sets, right? And so kind of situating the project manager to say, hey, listen, this is huge. You are kind of the direct accountable person. However, here's what you have in your toolbox and here's what we expect from you. I think that conversation between ops and project management at that level becomes a lot healthier, because then they kind of are understanding, okay, I am a function of getting this thing live, right? They might be in a position where they're not doing any of the building, obviously, because they're project managing, but they're in a position where they're kind of the glue. They're like gluing everything together and making sure that everything is cohesive.
I think that's it's such a massive point that, you know, I think a lot of the time we're like, okay, we've got our iron triangle, like the triple constraints. Okay, I got to keep this on budget and on time. And that's where the challenge ends, versus the perspective of, because I am an agent of growth, either for my client, if it's a services-based business, or for my own business, or even if it is a services-based business, like you said earlier, if you're delivering that, you know, without an overage, you're allowing that business, your business, to grow and do more and scale. And I think as an agent of growth, I think that's what you mean in terms of like that. It's such a healthier conversation. It's not like your job is to deliver this thing, this really big mission, on time, on budget, and at a level of quality or to our standards. Good luck. It's kind of like, if you do that, we are going to grow as a business. We are going to retain clients. We are going to have better margins that allow us to do more. That's super
and
cool.
fill in the blank there, right? With the team. And I always talk to my team about this. I'm like, if you guys want something, I said, come to me and we can figure out how to make that happen. Whether that's more time off, whether that's, you know, different responsibilities in the business, whether that's a raise, whatever it might be. My opinion says to me, okay, if I have a project manager that comes to me and says, I would like to make more money, I would say, okay, let's look at the delta of how projects go over, because agencies usually, typically, right, they accrue revenue on a time basis for the most part, right? And so in my mind, if I'm finishing projects on time, that's adding directly to my bottom line, which means I can pay my people more, right? And so if you're upfront and transparent with your team about this, especially your project managers, they can be firing on all cylinders, and whatever is important to them, work-life balance, more cash in their pocket, whatever it is, they can be in a position to help.
I love that, just openness to have that conversation. Businesses are businesses. You know, and it's and jobs are jobs, and usually, you know, we do a job because we love it, but also because we get paid. And aligning those goals, I think overall, like, what's in it for me? That question, I think, is what sort of drives that healthier conversation for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's super cool. Let's flip it. Let's ask the question: what is the most important way that the operations team at large is supporting project managers?
Oh, yeah. I mean, ultimately with that, project management rules of engagement, right? If ops is unclear with project management around how they should be updating a project, what data they want to see from them, I encourage my clients and all of the operators I've ever worked with to get super clear on key performance indicators and data as soon as humanly possible. Because there's really no clearer way to say, this is what I expect from you, than to line it out for them and then take a look at a number with them weekly, bi-weekly, whatever the cadence might be on the project. In my opinion, it's just such a huge addition. And if any operations team is in a position where they find themselves looking for a good way to have that conversation, a good way to be like, hey, look, how do I help you? That's probably the first place to start, is to just go to your project manager and say, what do you need from me in terms of clarity? Really, what do you need from me? And I think starting there and saying, okay, look, I absolutely know that we need to update this project in this way. Here's how we communicate about the project, right? Here's the budget for the project. Here's who you have on your team. I think just kind of, again, situating the project manager in kind of this bubble of, I expect this from you, but here's what I've given you in terms of resources to help you complete some of this stuff. So I don't like when operators are like, we just expect this project to be done by the end of the month, and then we just have to kind of figure it out. Then unfortunately, what ends up happening is there's no cadence, right? They come back in to, let's just say they're Asana, and they're like, where's this? Where's that? Where's the other thing? Where's this and the other? And then Slack gets blown up. And then all of the
Right.
team members are like, wait a second, bro, you haven't been in this project for like 2 months. And now all of a sudden you're just like, where is everything? Right? It's because
Mm-hmm.
they get stressed out. And
Mm-hmm.
instead of having the weekly meetings and having the numbers that they can go look at and the standard ways that you operate in a project, they start searching. And when they don't find something in the place they think it should be, then they
Mm-hmm.
get upset with the project managers. And then the project managers come back and say, well, you never told me you wanted it like
Mm-hmm.
this. And then round and round we go, right? So that's operationally absolutely an ops problem. That is 100% an ops problem. I am telling all my project managers listening that that is not your fault. If you get blown up on Slack because nothing is in the right place, but no one told you where to put it, you're safe with me. I promise you.
And I know a lot of our listeners just sighed with relief. They're like, "Thank you,"
I hear you.
because it's such a common challenge, and I think that absolutely makes sense. What is the best way for an operations team to support project managers? Well, support them, give them clarity,
Yeah.
give them a
Tell them what you want.
cadence to, provide
Yeah.
information and gather information. And then on the project management side, I know that some folks would be like, oh, another layer of reporting, like to police me and how I do my job. But I think what you said earlier, right? It's like actually just transparency about what this means for the business. If we are behind schedule, well, guess what? We can't start that, other big project with client X, when we expect it to wrap this project. We have to push that, and that's
Mhm.
going to change our revenue picture, and that's going to limit our ability to grow because we don't have as strong of a capacity, nor do we have as much resource to deliver more work at the standards that we want it to be. And those measurements, those data points help the business grow. And therefore, I need to orient the way I work around those rather than just being like, oh, that's silly. This is just a number I need to report up. That's not even how I manage projects. I'm
Yeah.
a bit more organic than that, but like having the maturity to understand that, yes, this is and should be a very clear and therefore mostly objective thing. Like,
Yeah.
what does
It's a
success look like?
relationship.
These things. Yeah.
Right? It's a relationship. You're in a relationship. You say, okay, I care about what this person wants from me, and
Mhm.
I'm going to augment the way that I potentially behave to give them that thing.
Awesome. Speaking of relationships, let's zoom in to just that ops team and project management team relationship. You work with a lot of different businesses, and from the many organizations that you've worked with, I'm just wondering, what are some of those defining characteristics of an ops team and a project management team working well together?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's obviously the rules of engagement, right? The standards, the here's what I expect from you type of thing. The second big thing is the communication, right? So we got to make sure that we're communicating effectively and communicating consistently. It's really tough, I think, when folks leave communication to the back burner and they only communicate when something is wrong instead of building out a cadence. Because then let's just say if we're meeting weekly and nothing's wrong, you get to say, hey, good job today, guys. So
Mhm.
that's really helpful for morale. The third kind of big bucket is data. Like it is truthfully it just is data visibility. And so I think data visibility, in my opinion, helps with the other things as well. So we can say, okay, if my standard is that we need to onboard a new client within 24 hours, however, if my data is telling me that that's totally impossible based on the way that we do projects, I need to go back and I need to augment how I'm positioning my standards to the team. And then same deal inside of communication, right? If we're in a position where someone might be new to the team, if they're kind of still training and whatnot, the data is telling us that there are a couple of missed marks because of the fact that this person might not have been trained, then we might need to go back and say, okay, could we add a couple more sessions in with the previous project manager or with the owner or whoever needs to be a part of that to make sure that we can fill in those gaps. And so again, it makes things a little bit more objective for us. So that's kind of the three big buckets that I look at in terms of the most glaring success points, I guess.
I feel like data is going to be this like steel, this sort of steel, which I love because in a way, data is intimidating, right? It's kind of hard to get. It's kind of hard to make that decision to be objective when what we're dealing with is, people. But then data is a driver. It is the reason to get together and communicate, and it is the reason to keep that conversation going of like, maybe some of the goals aren't realistic to your point, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that warrants a conversation to say, okay, maybe it isn't just this hard wall. Let's make the changes that we need to make in order to make either that goal realistic or to change the goal. because, we were unrealistic in setting that goal. I think that's great, right? Because then you have that
Right.
relationship, you're communicating, you've got those standards, you are, having those conversations at a regular cadence. To your point, even using those like moments, those touch points to pat each other on the back if nothing's going wrong. And then when an organization comes to you with, like an operational problem, whether it's like operational efficiency or project profitability, and you go in and you see that those things, those characteristics of an ops team and a project management team working together just don't exist. What are the first steps that you'd take to set them on the right path?
Yeah, so I would sit down and I would say, well, how are you guys doing this right now? If they're just like pulling their hair out and I need to just take a look, I'm like, well, what's going on exactly? And I'll look at those kind of three buckets of information. I'll say, okay, are we clear about what we expect from the expectations kind of pool of things? Do we have a clear standard for how we deliver on projects? Do we have clarity on the team that's involved? Do we have SOPs to support those things? Are all of our people veterans, or are they newer, or how does that work? Have these people been even trained on what they need to do, right? The next thing is, what have you communicated? Truthfully, there have been so many times where I have been hired into a project and they being the owner operator hasn't said anything to the project manager about how disappointed they might be in their performance. And I'm on the first meeting that we do that. And it's very, very awkward. It's so awkward because, it's challenging everyone. And I'm the type of person that like, I can't, if something's bugging me or whatever, not only can you physically see it, but also I just need to get it off my chest. I'm like, hey, listen, this thing happened and I just need to make sure that it's addressed, because if I fester with it, my mind starts going a little crazy and I'm like, okay, it just always ends up worse. So I think that when I come into a new project, I always tell my client, hey, listen, let's just like find the easiest way to address some of these micro problems immediately so that they don't fester into larger problems, literally into the business or literally into the relationship with the team members, right? And so I'll typically look at how they're functioning now, what kind of standards currently exist. So I'll look at obviously rules of engagement, how often they're updating the project. Do they have standards on where they want meeting notes put, right? Simple things like that, where we can just kind of administratively make sure that the project manager understands what's expected. Then we'll take a look obviously at how they're communicating both actual project updates and feedback about the projects, right? So that I think is kind of something that gets overlooked, is feedback on work and whatever else is happening in the project needs to be addressed, right? Because if we're looking at tons of revisions and things, that's going to slow the project down a lot, and we need to make sure expectations are clear there. And then I take a look, obviously, at data with them and I say, well, do we know if this is on time or on budget? And when do we know that? Do we know that the day before we ship the thing? Or do we know that 1 month in? Or how do we kind of understand? And so if that relationship is bad, it usually means that one of the three is off or all three don't even exist, truthfully. And there have been so many times where I've come into a business and none of it exists. And that's not anybody's fault. It just is something that they've had to kind of flow with because the business, it's growing crazy, or everyone's kind of wearing a ton of hats and it just feels, overwhelming. And I understand that they've been kind of bootstrapping it until now, but I think coming in and getting really intentional, whether the relationship has been soured or it hasn't, right? Whether you guys are still operating, functioning really well, like internally as a team, it's really helpful to kind of make that investment. I think of it like, I keep saying this, but going to couples therapy, even if you don't have a problem, it's proactive. You're able to have, build some good skills and hang out and actually have some time, if you have kids, right? Like you have some time to yourself actually, and you can actually have a conversation with them and be like, oh, I didn't realize that made you feel uncomfortable. Like, I'm sorry, I'll never do that again. Right. And so in my mind, it's the how do I communicate effectively? How do I let them know specifically what I need? And then how do we monitor that over time? Right. That's like the colloquial way of making sure that the relationship there doesn't sour or get any worse than it already is.
that therapy session for sure.
Exactly. It's the therapy session.
I mean, you're absolutely right in terms of it is a relationship, and there's things that need to sort of be in place. And I thought maybe I'm just going to put you on the spot here, but I'm wondering what are some of the conflicts and like points of friction that you've seen happen between, an ops team and a project management team, or an operator and a project management team that were actually pretty difficult to solve, but actually like opened the floodgates, opened the door of improving that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think the anecdotal example of just like the owner operator coming into like your Slack channel and being like, where the F is everything, and like freaking out, that I
Mm,
think everyone can relate to. And I think this kind of uh how do I put it, like intentional like input into the business, right, helps kind of alleviate some of that stuff. But I worked with a team once and they did a lot of launches, and they had a course and a coaching program, and they would do these launches. I think it was probably somewhere close between 6 and 8 a year, so it was a
mm-hmm.
frequent project that they did, and the projects were somewhat of a shit show. They really were. They were, and I say this with love because they had really really good people, and their launches were for the most part wildly successful. But when it came to the point where they were basically launching, they kind of stayed at one spot for a
Mm,
little while, and they were like, well, why is this happening? And so when I came in to work with them, they had explained to me that their tracking system and their kind of SOPs for how to set things up just basically didn't exist. And so what they would do was they would fly by the seat of their pants and lean on the
right.
project manager to be closing all the loops and making all the things fire and making sure the emails were out and the Facebook posts happened and all the ads were running properly with the media buyers and all of that stuff. And then at the end of the launch, they would look at the numbers and they would say, okay, where did we come in here? And then it would kind of spark this, like, because they would sprint too internally.
Mm, mm-hmm.
It's kind of how they operated. And so they would take some time off and let everything fester about how they were upset about the launch. And then the next
Right.
time they went to go prep for the launch, it was like this pulling hair out. So that meeting I was actually a part of. And I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, everyone's still so mad about the last launch last
Right.
month. And it was so crazy. And I thought to myself, I was like, we've got to make this a better system. So what I did was I came in and I was like, look, everyone is on the same page. Let's just say, for example, right? Everyone is trying to do the exact same thing and we're all in the same boat. And so, what I want to make sure happens is I want to make sure that we've got a visible way, because their launches would be about 15 days from like a promo to an actual cart open to a cart close time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very, and there were so many hands on deck, like emails, organic social, media buying, just every little thing you can think of with a large launch like this. And they would do like a pop-up Facebook group at some point. And I remember like all the interworkings were just like outrageous. And they were just doing so many things. So I remember talking with the project manager, and she was saying to me, she was like, we need a way to like basically tell what we need to change, right? Like a little bit sooner in the process. And so I remember thinking, okay, we need to create data visibility here. It's like the number one thing. And that's what we did. We basically made them a scorecard for 15 days. And we said, every day, you guys are going to have a micro meeting at the end of the day, review the day's data, and then it'll tell you guys what we might need to augment, right? Like if we're getting way more enrollments from, email than we are from Facebook, we need to double down and send another email potentially, right? Like the next day or whatever. And so I think that was a little bit better in terms of just creating a healthy conversation around what to do. And second thing we did was we were like, these are the standards, right? Here's how we're going to run this project, because way too much relied on the project manager in terms of just filling those gaps. And I think project managers, while a lot of them have the same competencies as an operator, often they're two different positions. They're two very
Mm-hmm.
different positions. And I think that, it's challenging when we start to expect a PMO to be a COO or to be
Mm-hmm.
an
Mm-hmm.
operator of any sort, and start to create some of these procedures, because what they actually are supposed to be doing is keeping the project on pace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And making sure to tie up all those loose ends and kind of be the glue. They're executors, they're not creators for the most part. And so in my mind, it's hard to muddy those waters. And that was what was happening with this business. So I know maybe a little bit more than you bargained for, but it was a crazy, crazy time, and probably one of the crazier projects I've ever had to like comb through and really work out in terms of all the moving parts.
I love that story. I also love this notion of a scorecard, especially when it comes down to just like bringing together that data day over day. With a launch, we want to see who's opening our email campaigns. We want to see what engagement we're driving on social media. But for another project, a project of a different nature, where maybe it's not accustomed to having data every day. How do you go about getting that data and building the process to record that data, capture it, and then have a conversation about it day over day?
Good question. And truthfully, I always get this because I think, to your point earlier, you were saying that data makes you nervous and you're like, I don't know about this. And I think almost everyone I talk to is like, oh, that sounds great, but it sounds like it's a pain in the butt to get there. And so how I typically approach this conversation is I say, well, what do you want? What do you want to see? Ideally, in the perfect case, what might we look at in terms of projects? We might look at the time that it takes to deliver a project, right? That project delta I was talking about before. We might take a look at how many times revisions come back in a project, right? If you're a service business, you might be in a position where revisions are killing you. We might take a look at budget, and I think those are all like surface level, pretty like surface level key performance indicators and data points. And then what we always can think about, so we can think about data like Russian nesting dolls. You've got like a big one, and then you break it open, and there's a little one underneath that tells the story about the bigger one, right? And so to me, I say, okay, well, why are we getting revisions? Okay, it's because maybe our task base, what's going on with our tasks, potentially it's not clear on the standards of what we need to deliver. So how might we take a look at those standards? Statistically speaking, the standards, if we move things out into the kind of earlier part of the project, we could be collecting more data from our clients around their preferences with design and all of those things. Oftentimes with turnaround time, we might take a look at, team availability, might take a look at clarity of actual tasks. We might take a look at overall budgeted time. Like, is our time budget just completely off because we think it's going to take this time and it actually takes this time? So I think if you start with the surface level data and say, like, these are the big dominoes that I need to make sure are like actually there, then you can start to layer in and go a little bit deeper and go a little bit deeper and go a little bit deeper. But ultimately, you won't be able to really find anything until you have those kind of initial KPIs in place, those initial data points. In my mind, it's something too, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like I always say, if data stresses you out, let's get 4 or 5 data points on this project, and then if everything looks fine, then there's really no reason to go deeper, right? Like, you don't
Right.
have to be inundated with numbers. I personally am just curious and I like numbers, so I'll go a little bit deeper typically and say, like, okay, here's how we might do this. But really at that point, what we say is, okay, these are the, big numbers we want to see. And then we just need to ask ourselves, what might this look like to get this number and get it to be the most accurate source of truth that we possibly can? So that typically comes with obviously using a project management tool, right? If you're doing repeat projects and you don't have a home for those projects, get one soon. And I think it's challenging too, because people are like, oh, well, we work well in Sheets or we work well in whatever. And I'm like, that's wonderful for framing out a project. But unfortunately, coming in and being able to leverage some of the reporting tools that some of these project management systems have is wonderful. And you're really missing out, I think, if you start to deviate from that. That's number one. Does our project management tool natively report this? Is my big question, typically to them first. Second is how difficult would it be for us to find that number outside of our project management tool? Do we need to take a look at Harvest? Do we need to say, okay, if our project is going this way and we've got a budget in Harvest, do I need to go into Harvest, and can Harvest tell me? So I take a look at my systems first, right, my tech stack, and can we report on this natively? The second thing I look at is what my people are reporting. So I say, like, okay, are they ticking off boxes in the project management tool? What are they ticking off? How can that help tell a story to me through the reports of the project management tool? So I might need to augment the way that my project templates are set up, or the way that my project in general is set up so that I can get visibility into the data that I need. And then the third kind of big one is this just going to need to be manual? Is someone going to need to just report on this and put the number in the box? And so really what we need to say is, okay, I'm okay with first starting with basically the reports section of things in my Asana or inside of my Harvest account. And that's all that I'm going to do. I'm just going to do that because I don't want to weigh heavily on my team, and then kind of trickle down from there. Because in my mind, even if the team needs to put in a number or two, it's going to help, I think, just the overall cadence of the project in specific instances, right? If you're in there saying, okay, here's how much time I spent on this project, but it's already in Harvest, you should probably just report from it in Harvest instead of making them waste their time going and putting these numbers in. But it is really, really helpful, I think, to have that conversation and then ask yourself, okay, how important is this metric to me and how difficult would it be to get it?
I'm getting less intimidated by numbers as time goes on through this conversation. Some data, any data almost, helps you not have just a conversation about feelings and gray areas. You can actually measure something. Is it the de facto number? Is it a best practice number? Is it the data point to end all data points? It doesn't have to be. It just has to be a point that you can look at, unpack, go through the layers and figure out if there's an adjustment that needs to be made in order to get the results that everyone is looking to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll change your life. Honestly, it really will.
Let's use that to dive into just some of the juicy stuff. So what I wanted to talk about is just where the lines can blur, for better or for worse, in terms of ops versus project management and the personalities in play, and talking about some of the conflict that can exist and some of the problems that might create some resistance to some of the things you're saying, right? Creating standards, getting data, etc., communication. So how can an organization that is trying to standardize its project delivery practices get their rogue project managers, in air quotes, on side?
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? It's like taming a wild animal in a lot of ways. I think especially if you have a seasoned project manager, someone who's been in the business for a while, who's been doing things and who has been getting, fairly good results, right? Leading the team and all of that. And then let's just say the organization grows and a box on the org chart opens up for an ops manager, and this person is suddenly reporting to someone who is brand new, right? In this case. It could cause a little bit of friction. And I think that, I think I said it before, but just having an open conversation and saying, how can I help you achieve better things, or where are the issues right now that you see with project management? I really do think that experience is king, like with pretty much everything. And in my mind, I think that if we have a really experienced project manager who seems to be doing something right, we have a conversation with them and we say, hey, listen, how can we create standards around what you're doing? How can we do that? And I think I actually listened to this audiobook a few years back. It was fantastic. It was about expectations versus agreements, and about how thrusting expectations on someone versus coming to an agreement about how things are going to work with them actually increased the capability of that person to fulfill on expectations. And so it's really interesting to come to an agreement with a project manager and, someone who might have gone rogue, right? And say, hey, listen, I know you want to do things this way. How can we keep some elements and aspects of what you're doing that really are important to you and also are really driving business, but also how can we kind of come to a mutual agreement about some of the ways that you're going to either report on that or that we're going to communicate on that, or how that's going to work. And so I think that's really the big idea here, right? Is to really come to a solid place with your project manager and your ops person, because I think it's so challenging, especially probably prior to that relationship. The project manager likely had a lot more autonomy, right, than is going to happen in the future. And so that can be really difficult to part with. But I think what we spoke about earlier relating to finding people who are invested in the growth of the business, not just the growth of themselves, or, something, I think it's just really helpful to identify those people, especially early on in the business. So if you're in a position where you have a project manager and they're just not willing to agree with standards and they're not willing to meet, your ops person halfway, or they're not willing to meet you halfway on how you want things, then that person unfortunately might not be the best fit for your organization. And we might need to be in a position where we need to think about restaffing. And it's not a fun thing. I never recommend that people let other people go. It's never exciting. But I do think that, like what we spoke about, it does help us understand who's invested in the long term, who sees themselves as a pillar of the organization, not just a person here with a job that wants to go home at the end of the day, right? And it's really, really going to, I think, change the dynamic of the team culture if those conversations can be had, and if necessary, right, the folks who are still too rogue can be eliminated. And maybe find success and meaning in another company.
Yeah, coming back to that sort of ability versus maturity. Sometimes they won't be the right fit. But honestly, the other part, I wasn't expecting you to say that. The fact that, listen, yes, sometimes you're going to have a rogue project manager, and actually they might be doing something great that should be part of that standard. Can they just go and do their own thing? No, it's probably not good for operations, but can we incorporate some of those things and come to an agreement to get them on side? I think that's great. I wasn't thinking about
I'm not
that at
just
all.
trying to lasso and hogtie people. That's not what's going on here. Definitely not. Especially, again, if it's working, right? If we're in a position where we've had a good PM and they're doing some crazy stuff, but maybe it's working for us, I think personally that's totally fine. I mean, everyone's ops blueprint is very different, just like everyone's business is different and every person is different. And in my mind, I think if we can find the good that's coming out of that rogue situation, then we can say, hey, listen, I've understood and noticed what you're doing well. Let's maybe meet in the middle and say that these couple of things that I need from you need to happen.
Actually, probably a good segue into my last question, which is kind of zooming out from project management and ops teams and how those teams grow and how those teams interact. But for organizations, right? For organizations who want something to change but aren't necessarily convinced that they need to invest in getting someone like yourself to come in and really look at things and, create the standards to have that leap forward. What advice do you have for them?
Well, first I would say I can't want change for you more than you want it for yourself. So that's number one. So I think that the people who ultimately are ready to grow the business and have this change agent in their business around project management and ops kind of, synchrony, it happens, in my opinion, like breaking your leg, right? It happens all of a sudden, and there's a triage that needs to happen, and then you get in a position where things get a little bit hectic and somewhat out of control. I think if you can be in a position where you can treat it a little bit more proactive, and be in a position where you're not going to let everything break before you seek to improve something like this, it'll help obviously the business grow a lot faster. And so it's challenging when I meet with clients who are like, everything's everywhere and I've just lost all hope for projects and everything's off the rails and whatever. I mean, we can obviously still get them back on track, but it's obviously a way more difficult place to come from, both business wise, mentally, emotionally, right? You're just kind of like done with everything. And so I always say to the folks who are thinking, oh, well, we could be improving on this, I don't disagree that you could do some of it on your own, especially if you're firing on all cylinders, your products are looking pretty good, your team is small, you guys are growing. Those types of things, I think a lot of what we shared here could really be really solid places for you to spend some time. And I really don't want this to be ignored, especially, as you're growing, because what ends up happening is when things grow, then, they need to be moved to, like, I'm thinking of like all my plants. Like I just moved my one plant from like a smaller pot into a bigger pot. I had to like add more soil and like figure out how that was going to go. And so it's really challenging sometimes when you are in the weeds of the thing and you're like, well, I'm not exactly sure like what the new structure might look like. It's really helpful to have someone like myself, or like a colleague or a friend that you have who is an operator, to come in and say, hey, look, I'm not in your business every day, but I think you're missing some of these key things. It's my opinion that having that opportunity, and that goes for anything, ops, marketing, sales, and all of that stuff, right? Having someone come in, an expert who isn't in your business, come and speak into it and say, here where I see the leaks might be, right? And here's where we might need to plug things up and figure things out. I think it's just such a helpful conversation and such a helpful perspective to have. So if you're not looking to invest, that's fine. I say take the tactics from today and start to, have those healthy conversations with your team, at least, to help kind of ease into this kind of conversation in the future around improving ops and project management. If your leg is broken, call me. That would be totally fine, because truthfully, I feel your pain. And honestly, if you're in a position where you have another colleague or someone who can speak into your business at a high level from this lens, absolutely take advantage of that and say, okay, just come in and for a day and take a look at how things are moving around and tell me what you feel like I need to do. I think that action alone is a very micro commitment, but also such a huge impact.
I love that for that perspective.
Yeah.
For sure. Listen, Alyson, these insights were all super valuable. I think the one that really resonated with me was just this notion of a data scorecard, but also this cadence of, project managers meeting with ops teams. Status meetings aren't just for, a client project manager relationship. If we're not having those conversations regularly and looking at the data and expressing our expectations, then of course it's going to be this, what somebody might call a swoop and poop situation where, suddenly someone's coming in, whether it's the client or the operator, who's coming in and saying, "Oh, I'm upset. Things are off the rails. I'm just gonna be a bull in a china shop for a little bit." Having that cadence, having that framework from ops to have those conversations around data and not just about feelings, to really understand how a project is lifting up a business and allowing it to grow, to create a better, a healthier business, but also a better quality of life for the staff, for whatever each individual employee wants from their role there in that business.
A lot of fun things we chatted about today.
We really did. Hopefully listeners found that insightful. And again, Alyson Caffrey from Operations Agency, look her up. There's lots of things that, honestly, you and we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I think instead we'll we'll do another episode.
Yeah, most definitely.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much. Thanks for coming on the show, and hopefully we will talk with you soon. So what do you think? Are your PM and ops teams collaborating to their full potential? Or is the culture a bit more of a necessary détente? What would happen to your business and organizational culture if you could maximize the interlock between ops and your PMO? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hone your skills as a strategic project leader, come and join our collective. Head over to thedigitalprojectmanager.com/membership to get access to a supportive community that shares knowledge, solves complex challenges, and shapes the future of our craft together. From robust templates and monthly training sessions that save you time and energy, to the peer support offered through our discussion forum, community events, and mastermind groups, being a member of our community means having over 1,000 people in your corner as you navigate your career in digital delivery. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and stay in touch at thedigitalprojectmanager.com. Until next time,